Yes, I think that's nice. So we all have a single mic, which I would assume they're on. Wait, I'll go on. Vai, abbastanza simmetrico. Welcome. Hi, everyone. Okay, so the mics are working, which is great. Welcome to this panel. I'm very happy to have this set of people around the table to speak about something that I think is close to all of our hearts. It's half of the population, and even a little bit more, which unfortunately is not yet represented enough in terms of decision making, the power is not shared enough, and I think we're at this stage of multi-crisis of everything we're discussing today in terms of exclusion, in terms of climate change, in terms of poverty, where we can't not ask ourselves if things would be a bit different if we would have a different style of leadership and a more shared style of leadership and of power and of decision making between women and men, and really also between generations. We're going to have a short panel right after this with some young activists and journalists. And it's really something that I think touches to the core of the change, of the cultural change we need to bring, which is the most difficult part of the job, which I think can feel lonely, but it's something we need to continue pushing. So today we have with us a panel which has been working on this each in their way, but very hard over the past years throughout their career, throughout their personal lives, and we will get to learn through the panel a little bit the work that they've done, their perspective, the challenges that we still have, and also the solutions that we have to bring. What is it that we need to do differently to really advance the sharing of power, of decision making, and starting to take better decisions for the world we live in? So I will start with you, Elisabeth, because you're at my left. So we have Elisabeth Changui, who is the Executive Vice President of the group's Corporate Social Responsibility for Orange. We have Ulrik Westergaard Knudsen, who is the Deputy Secretary General of the OECD. And he's a great ally. I really wanted at least one man in the panel, because I think very often we have only women speaking about gender equality, but it's a joint fight, it's a joint problem. And I met Ulrik when we were working with I was working with the G20, and he's one of the best allies I've ever met, so it's great to have you on the panel. And then we have Maria Grazia Squicciarini, who's the UNESCO Director for Social Policies for the Social and Human Sciences sector. So welcome. Ulrik, I would actually start with you, because the OECD, of course, has a lot of data, a lot of insights on what's working, what's not working. And you recently released the OECD Development Center's Social Institutions and Gender Index 2023 Global Report. And I wanted to start a little bit with some key findings and some key figures, and I ask you if you could explain what are still today the main drivers behind gender inequality.
Well, thank you so much, Gaia, and thank you for the invitation. Thank you for all the work you are doing, have been doing personally, but also through C30. It's really, really an important triple course. And I'm also happy about accepting the invitation, because it means I can provide a little bit of gender diversity to this, panel. But let me dive into some of the figures and the facts. We're very proud at the OECD that we've done this SIGI Global Report 2023, because it does establish in facts and figures in a scientific way, in an evidence-based way, that what we know, but is better, proven through evidence, that we cannot really achieve gender equality without addressing discriminatory laws, social norms and practices, and how they stand in the way of gender equality. Our 23 report shows very, very clearly that to transform these social institutions, we're not progressing fast enough. It does not help exactly that we've had certain global significant events, but there's also a fear right now of a general backlash against gender equality globally. Having said that, and that's the starting point, there is at least a little bit of progress to record also in our report. More countries have set the legal age for marriage for girls and boys at 18 without exceptions. That's at least positive. Also, there are more gender quotas and national action plans which promote equality in political and public life. The share of women in national parliaments, I think another important indicator, has increased from 24% in 19 to nearly 27% in 23. I mean, it's not impressive, 27%, right? So, but it sort of You have it there in a nutshell. We've not come far enough, but there is a little bit of progress. Today, women spend 2.6 times more than men on daily unpaid care and domestic work, which is way too much, but it's a little bit better than the factor 3.3 that we had back in 2014. So again, a little bit of progress, but the numbers are not good. We also have to say that gender discrimination today is high or very high in 37 countries, which together are home to 40% of all girls and women in the world. So that's not good. 45% of the globe thinks men should have more right to work than women if jobs are scarce. So 45%. So that is a real big change of attitude needed there, but we'll come back to that, I'm sure. And also, 340 million women cannot have a safe abortion. That's also a staggering figure, I think. So considering all this, we have, of course, also, as we always do at the OECD, we try to come up with some policy advice. And some of the things we'd like to see governments and policymakers do is the following. They have to remove discriminatory legal frameworks, whether that's customary, statutory, and/or religious, and enforce coherent laws to protect women's rights. That's number one. Number two, they have to improve gender disaggregated and intersectional data collection to make specific needs and what is now invisible more visible. That is also what we do at the OECD. We try to provide evidence and figures for policymakers to be able to tackle problems as they really are. And then, of course, the third thing is that they have to monitor the impact of policies, of initiatives, and also share lessons. And this is really something that goes for all stakeholders, governments, multilateral organizations like represented here, policy makers, civil society, philanthropic organizations, companies. We all have to act to transform the discriminatory social norms into gender equitable ones. We should apply a gender lens to a wide range of policies and programs. We should be engaging influencers, community leaders, and the media to shift the policy debate. And we should also, and I think that is sometimes overseen a little bit, we also have to engage men and boys. There are now also early signs that in certain areas on social mobility, how well boys are doing in school, figures around loneliness and suicidal rates, there are also some issues for men and boys. So I think we have a double win here if we can engage the men and boys to see that gender equality is a two-way street. Both for the sake of men, boys, women, and girls, of course. So we will continue to monitor this. We will continue to address these discriminatory social institutions through the SIGI and also through a brand new OECD gender strategy. I hope to be able to say a little bit about that later. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ulrik. And I think it's always important to start from data, because without having the data, A, we don't understand the situation, but B, we can't track how much we're moving forward. And the reality is that, yes, there are some wins, but we're still moving forward way too slow, right? Like data right now says probably my granddaughter or great-granddaughter might see gender equality. That's the level that we're moving at right now, and we really need an acceleration, a shock to make sure we bring change now, and we can't wait 3-4 generations more for that to happen. Maria Grazia, a question for you. I'm very happy to have an Italian on the panel and a name I can pronounce easily. So you work, of course, your work on the international stage to advance gender equality has been instrumental in encouraging countries to actually commit to all the policies, to all the measures, to all the fixes that we need to do that Ulrik was also speaking about. Can you share a challenge, also a personal one, that you've encountered during your journey while trying to to champion this cause internationally?
Well, if I have to synthesize it in one word, it's mentalities. And I mean, I don't think it's by chance that it's called mentalities, in the sense that, look at me, I'm blonde, right? And I've been dealing a lot, for instance, with artificial intelligence. So one day I was at a conference and they look at me like, how do you know what is artificial intelligence? I said, what? It's a woman, blonde, that dyes her hair black. So this is the kind of resistance that you find towards women, and the fact that there are some assumptions in society that there are roles that are well established and that it should be fulfilled throughout. So actually, when I said mentality, what I think hinders very often not only the development and deployment of policies, but also the effectiveness of the policies put in place is our inability to get at the root causes. So really to transform mentalities, if it's actually something that we are doing at UNESCO, and I have Garance here that is actually working actively on that. The idea is that we have to, first of all, address toxic mentalities. For instance, one is supposing that the one that has to bring money to the house is the man. And actually, and this actually goes in line with what you just said, Ulrich, that is like women work much more at home because it's supposed to be the case. We are supposed to be at home and we are supposed to take care of the kids, of the ill, and not really have time. We are time poor as women. And we don't have the time really to not only engage in education, or career development, but even very often there is a negative correlation with participation in the labor market, simply because the day for everybody is 24 hours. So if I do more work at home, if I have more things to take care of, I have less time to work or to improve myself, or even only take care of myself. So this is one of the problems. The other thing that relates to mentality is the fact that with that, there is a whole setting in society that policy is trying to fix, but is an ad hoc fix because it doesn't get, again, to the root causes. Let's think about, paternity leaves. In Korea, for instance, you have the most fantastic setting if you were to be exploited. You have 18 months of possible leave. Well, it turns out that just above 4% of the men take it. Because, of course, there is a societal constraint that tells you, oh, you're not a good worker unless you stay there, and then it's the problem of your wife to take care of whatever kids you might have. So there is this issue as well. And actually, I think we have to look at ourselves. Sometimes, too often, we suffer, again, this is mentalities, and we have to work at that. And we suffer from the imposter syndrome. By the time you're tasking a person with whatever challenging task, a man will always approach the issue by saying, I can do that, easy. And I mean, in the PISA study, for instance, that OECD produces, there were a number of examples whereby having the same level of educational attainment, boys would say, oh, this is easy peasy, I can do that very easily. And girls would say, oh, I found it very difficult. And perhaps they were even performing better than the boys. So we have this kind of belief. And for instance, where our ADG, Gabriela Ramos, was pushing in Mexico, for instance, to have 50-50 represented in parliament, then there was an objection, again, the mindset like, oh, but then we will have half of the parliamentarians that are incompetent. So what is this assumption that men are competent and women are not up to the task? And too often, this is actually brought forward by women. Again, if we are tasked with the education of our children and we continue to perpetuate this kind of beliefs, of course we are contributing to go against our own cause. So there is really, to me, the reason why the policies have a hard time having the transformative effect that we would like to see is because we don't manage yet to get at the root causes. And this is why, as I mentioned, we have this work on transforming mentalities. We have done that, the first one in India, for instance. And I mean, I think everybody can understand what are the challenges that we are facing. And we also have developed a number of tools and pedagogical type of activities, including master classes, that actually even start with the simple concept of raising awareness. Because very often, from discrimination of all types, whether gender-related or even race-related, the problem at stake is that you're not really aware of it. It's so much ingrained in the way you've been raised, in the way you've been behaving so far, that even in the language expression, I mean, I don't know how many of you speak Spanish, but anything that is good is related to your father, or to the fact of your mother really being nasty. So even in the language, we have started to buy these arguments whereby some things are for men, others are for women, and anyway, better men. So let's realize that gender discrimination ultimately entails, if we think of a world black and white, is one half that is against the other half. If we believe in a world that has colors, as we do believe, then it's even worse because it's a minority that it takes over the majority, and we have to react to that.
Thank you, Maria Grazia. And I think what you're saying is very true. Of course, discrimination and inequalities, they work because they're so ingrained, because they're so internalized that we are the first ones to continue to perpetuate certain models. So it's really a work we need to start doing on ourselves and understanding, you know, okay, this is actually not okay. This is actually a systemic issue, not something I'm only experiences. And each of us has the power to break it, right? So to break that cycle in our family, in our community, in our job, by speaking up and by really trying to shift how we think about ourselves. And I think that's really something that applies to women and to men. I think so many boys, so many men are also stuck in stereotypes that you shouldn't be empathetic, you shouldn't be kind, you should be just competitive. And if you're not, that's not okay. And it's something we really need to liberate both genders from. And that's, I think, what gender equality finally is about. Elisabeth, let's come to you. So if we look at the pipeline, right? So I don't know if everyone is familiar maybe with the concept of pipeline, but the idea really is that when you look at the workforce, you have a pipeline of talents within the workforce that becomes always smaller because we have, I mean, not equality, but we have a much larger proportion of women at the bottom of the workforce, and then this pipeline becomes smaller and smaller and smaller, and at the end, so at the C-level, just as, I mean, everybody here is, but Elisabeth, you are for sure here of a big private company, we have a tiny percentage of women. So we really lose women along the pipeline, and that's a big problem that we have across our companies, across our countries. So if we look at the pipeline across the different workforces, we do lose a lot of women along the way, and very few make it to the top. You, of course, are part of the very few that has made it to the top. And I wanted to ask if you also could share a challenge that you experienced on your way to the top, and explain also why it is so important to have women like you and hyper-competent women at all the different levels, and how is it that we can really make this happen and shift gears compared to what we're doing.
Thank you, Gaia. Piacere, sono contenta di stare qui. There's a kind of Italian connection here.
Sorry, Ulrike.
That's why. Well, I will start with an anecdote from about the challenges from my former professional life. Before being executive VP in charge of CSR at Orange, I was a TV journalist, host, and I was the first woman to host the most emblematic culture show in the major TV in France, France 2. It was just 10 years ago, and not 20 years, but the first ever woman. And the first show, what were the reactions the day after? A lot of reactions on social networks about how can she dare showing her legs in a cultural show about intellect. So apparently it was not possible to have both legs and brain. So first challenge, objectivation. Second challenge, I was a TV host for like more than 10 years, hosted culture shows before for many years. But second reaction, yes, she was here just because the TV had to appoint a woman. So second challenge, questions about your legitimacy. And then if I jump into my new role now at Orange, when I chose to change career, of course, I asked myself some questions. Well, I come from a very different professional world. I never worked in telcos. I was never part of an ex-com of a big company. Can I really do that? So third challenge, self-censorship. And this is not, I mentioned this not to make women guilty, it's just self-censorship inherited from all those stereotypes you just described. So 3 challenges. So why, and then the pipeline also, why less women? Because in companies, women ask questions about, well, can I have a work-life balance if I have kids, etc. So those challenges are really crucial for many women. So why is it important to make it to the top? Just one example of a research made by MIT researchers 10 years ago. they gathered a team with only men with very high IQ, and another team with men, women, average IQ. And so they had some business case, etc., to solve. And guess who was the smarter team? The most diverse team. So there are many examples like that. So yes, we have to have a diverse leadership because it's a matter of resilience, it's a matter of performance, and it's very important. And so now how in our company we foster that mindset? Of course, we have to struggle to fight against stereotypes. We have also to promote personal development, to struggle against self-censorship. We have to promote mentoring, and we do this with programs like Women Got Talent, with a Tandem program. And we also encourage women to join a women network because together we're stronger. So these are one of the many levers in companies that we try to implement.
Thank you, Elisabeth. And I think it's very nice and important to always hear personal stories and personal challenges, because I think it's the best reflection, starting point to reflect on these issues, right? It's our story, how we live it, because if we did, probably most other women out there are living it. And that's really something that hopefully can inspire people also listening, right? To understand, if you're a woman, to understand, okay, I'm not alone, other women also self-censor, even at the highest level, and we all go through it and we can all improve. And for men also to understand better how it feels, and what is it that we're encountering, and how is it that you can be an ally in helping us, change how things look. So thanks for sharing a more personal story. Ulrich, coming from the OECD perspective, I wanted to ask if you can share insights on why it's important for women to be actors of change at all levels. But especially, I know that you had some components within the report that were looking at climate change and the role of women in climate change, which are disproportionately affected by climate change, and SRHR, so sexual reproductive health and rights. And just another follow-up question, so you can tackle them together. What do you think, and I think we touched already a little bit to what policymakers and other actors, including, of course, multilateral organizations, private sector, can do to enable women to participate in decision-making processes?
Sure. But I want to share a little bit of my personal life as well. The Italian thing. My wife is half Italian, and our three daughters all chose to bear her surname, Tereni. So I'm just warning you that though it is a bit intimidating to share the stage with so many strong Italian women, it's not a situation that I'm totally unfamiliar with. I also want to share a little bit of my previous work as OECD Gender Champion, but also in my previous position as CEO or Permanent Secretary of State at the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, just to underline how important it is what you and Elisabeth said about sorry, I forgot the word.
Self-censorship.
No. Before you have to have you have to have the talent pool. You have to have the pipeline. The pipeline. Sorry, yes. The pipeline is so extremely important, because people always told me, both in my previous job and this job, but can't you just appoint more women? Yes, you can, to a certain degree. You can appoint women to leadership positions, but at one point, if you have in the pipeline, only 3 women left waiting, and 40 men, by the way, some of those men maybe they should not be in the pipeline. They always say, yeah, I can do anything. They enter the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and at age 26, they say, I'm ready to be CEO, right? Whereas women with 40 years of experience said, no, I think I need a little bit more here and there. So the pipeline is also sort of not always an evidence-based figure. But you do run into problems if you don't stimulate the pipeline. If you lose women in their 30s, which is what often happens both in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs where I work, but also at the OECD, you're in trouble. So you have to work on that pipeline continuously. Otherwise, you get into legitimacy problems when you're trying to appoint your way into 50-50. I'll share some figures for the OECD, because we have tried to walk the talk. Between 2013 and 2022, women officials in executive leader positions actually increased from 23.5% to 43.3%. That is massive within 10 years, to go from 23% to 43%. And actually last year we reached parity at the A7 level, which is sort of director's level. But we're not quite there when we go to the pipeline. We're still not there. So there's still a lot of work ahead of us. I just could not help myself to stress how important the pipeline issue is. Yes, we have also in the SIGI report done some work on how important it is, whether we talk about SR, HR, or whether we talk about climate change. When you bring women to decision-making bodies, we become better at tackling also those issues. Not only do they bring their own experiences, they are often the victims of some of these issues, not also on climate change. We see that it's adversely affecting men and women. But once we bring women into decision bodies, be that in the private sector or the public sector, we see that we come up with better solutions. And they don't have to have average IQ, they can also be above. But it's something that our evidence underlines as well. We've also come up with a number of key recommendations on how we can boost women's participation in leadership, and this goes actually both for governments, public, private sector. I'll just mention 3 of them that are pretty important, I think, some of them very practical, not least the first one. We need to support parental leave policies, because it is in the 30s that we often, late 20s, 30s, that we lose women, at least in OECD countries. We need to provide quality and affordable early childcare, flexible working conditions to enable women of childbearing age to maintain a career. This goes back to what you said, Maria Grazia. If you're caught up all this unpaid daily work and there are no institutions to help you, we know how it ends, right? The second thing is that we need to provide women with leadership and management training. And the third thing is that we need to put in place, if not quotas, then at least targets for women's representation in decision-making bodies, in government, in companies. Many European countries have done so with results. So that's just some of what we want to do. Our gender strategy, I'm promoting it again. It's brand new. We'll renew efforts to collect these gender disaggregated data and mainstream gender equality in our work, also when it comes to environmental and climate policies.
Yeah. Thank you, Rick. And actually, I see there is Chiara Corazza here in the public, who was also with me, and she was the French representative to G20 Empower.
Is she Italian?
Originally. There is clearly a connection. But I think what's interesting that we were working on as G20 Empower was to say, you know, the paternity leave, for example, has to be mandatory. Because at some point, if you don't give the same measures, and if women have to take maternity leave and fathers are pushed from society not to, as much as you have the law, it's not going to change in practice, right? So we need to be even more ambitious and somehow impose change. And then people will understand why that change made sense and how is it that that helps really fill the gap that we have in terms of discrimination. So I think it's important to be hyper ambitious in these type of measures. So thanks for suggesting them. So Elisabeth, we heard already a little bit about your fascinating career and your shift also in career over time. And I wanted to ask both from your hat as Orange, leading CSR for Orange, but also as your previous hat as someone that worked within the media world. Of course, the media world has a huge potential and capacity to impact our lives, to enter into our family discussions, to really shape the mentalities, the opinions that people have. So I wanted to ask, how is it that leveraging these different perspectives that you have, we can change, we can bring this change, we can accelerate the mobilization of different actors. I mean, we were here, the forum is powered by Convergence, this kind of convergence of different actors around a change that allows more women to be part, and an active part, not to just tick the box part of decision-making processes.
Well, about the media perspective, one example, when we are building programs of personal development for our women at Orange, we also do a media training for her. Why? Because you know that still in the media, I think in France, I think that 85% of public speaking on TV, etc., is still trusted by men. You know, no offense, the famous mansplaining, manspreading, etc. So we at Orange were proud to do media training for our women engineers that after they can do interviews, and so it's experts speaking in the digital field also through women. So regarding the media perspective, it's really important. As a company, we of course we really have a duty of fighting against stereotypes and against discrimination, and that's really what we do first. For instance, we are the first CAC 40 company in France to have signed a global international agreement with Unite Global Union for Equality Work, gender of equality at work for everyone. That means that we have the same policy in France, in Poland, in Jordan, in Mali, regarding work-life balance, regarding equal pay, equal work, equal pay, regarding fighting against discrimination, etc. So that's non-negotiable at Orange. So, and we also have the duty to always, for this pipeline, a great accelerator for the pipeline are the role models. We are the second CAC 40 company in France to have appointed a woman as a CEO, Christelle Heinemann, and believe me, it's really an accelerator because everyone at every level of the organization can say, yes, I can do it. Also. And France is not the only example. We have a woman CEO in Botswana, we have a woman CEO in Poland, we have a woman CEO in Guinea-Bissau, and the importance of a role model is really crucial. And then again, mentorship again, because I remember this, I think that was Michelle Obama that said that when you worked hard, you made your way through the door, don't slam the door behind you, reach back. It is very important. And we are very proud at Orange, for instance, to have founded this NGO called Capital Filles. I'm the president of this NGO to help girls in suburbs to have ambition, and girls are mentored by women employees in companies. So now Capital Filles was founded by Orange, but we were reached by big companies like Société Générale, like L'Oréal, etc. And really this mentorship and reach back, that's how we foster the pipeline from the beginning, from the school.
And I think this idea of slamming the door behind you is a very important point, because I think that's part of what's perpetuating the problem, is that of course there's so few positions for women that we're like, oh my God, no, okay, like that's my position and I'm not going to facilitate others. And it's just a way of then just perpetuating a model of advancing yourself, self-interest, and not knowing that you're there and other women will be standing on your shoulders, and you need to make your shoulders big enough to really make that happen. So I think it's always important to say it and then to walk the talk as you're doing, with concrete actions, concrete initiatives that really help other women emerge and be lifted up, and we will all be stronger if we do that. So thanks for doing it, and for spending time on work, off work, to make it happen. Maria Grazia, I have a question for you, just if you have something to add on what has already been said from Ulrike, Elizabeth, but also drawing on your experience, which of course is different from the one that Elizabeth had. But what is it that we can learn on what's working well to advance gender equality, and what is it that is not working and we need to fix?
Well, let me share something that I learned when I was working for the presidency of the G20 in Argentina. We were supporting with a report, and actually what you said, Elizabeth, is very, very true. That is like we have a tendency to complain about the fact that it's a men's world and it's a boys' club, and then to slam the doors to the ladies that come in the back. Now, having said that, anyway, we also have to, and this is what I learned during the process of that report, where we were really trying to gather a lot of evidence, because without the evidence, there is no ability, as we were saying, to advance the policies, nor actually to say, look, the problem is there and it's very evident. And is that we are not the problem. We should stop thinking that the problem to fix is us. Because by the time there is violence against women, by the time there are women that keep being killed every day, and unfortunately after the COVID, this has been going worse and worse. If we think about what happens, for instance, in Afghanistan, where it's not only about the physical violence, it's also the preclusion of any future. So these are the kind of the policies that we have to, and I mean, that we have to implement, think, design well, because obviously every time when it comes to policy, the devil is in the details. So it doesn't suffice to have the good intention of let's foster education. Which type of education? Which skills? And we have to be more self-aware. You mentioned it. For instance, if you look at what the labor market asks, it's a bundle today of technical skills, that depends on the topic we're talking about, and social-emotional skills. Now, it turns out that each and every statistic tells us that, if anything, we are particularly good when it comes to social-emotional skills. But we seldom leverage it because, again, we have this technophobia. We also have this STEM leaky pipeline, as it's called in the jargon, whereby you only have, especially in technology-related specialties, very few women that enter. And then the more you go forward in the career and in the labor opportunities, the more they start going out of the path, and we don't help ourselves. So there is no mentoring very often. There is no peer learning that helps people going back, women going back into the funnel and for this to work. But it's also true that too often we are facing, that this is something that we have to fix, that we have big ambitions with no money. We have to walk the talk, as you said, but also we need to put the money where our mouth is. How am I going to develop a policy that is really effective if I don't have the budget? And that's why, for instance, UNESCO is advising very much to have gender budgeting. So if we are serious about solving the issue and narrowing the gap until it disappears, and I don't want to wait, you put it very clearly, and I couldn't agree more. I did some research a few years ago about innovation that is about basically looking at the future. And by the time we were looking at innovation as proxied by patent, we saw that typically there is the group of inventors of these patents are generally men, so the overwhelming majority. But in the latest 10 years, we have observed a bit of a narrowing this gap. However, as we were saying before, the pace is way too slow. If we continue to go at the pace we have seen in the last 10 to 20 years, it will take until 2080, so not even my kids basically will see it, by when we will have almost half of the inventors being women, or half of the team seeing at least a woman in the team, which means there will not be diversity. But I think the other thing we should do in policies, and we are working on that, so actually we really invite everybody to join us in Brazil between the end of November, 30th of November, 2nd of December, because we are going to have the third forum on anti-racism and anti-discrimination, where we are going to present two strands of work, one of them aimed at showing how simply the language, so this also links back to what I was talking about before, actually puts off women when it comes to entering the labor market, is really, we looked at the job posting and the language used there. And you can clearly see that it's not only an issue about the entrance in the labor market, it's an issue about going up the ladder in the career. And another one that I think is even more fundamental, because if you think about the constituency of UNESCO, we have 194 member states. I mean, there is barely anybody left out of that. And so we see all ranges of, from poverty to developed countries. And you can see that there is a need to put evidence, and this is what we are doing, about what it means to be gender-based resilient. The COVID crisis, the other crises that have followed, unfortunately, it seems like we are moving from one to the other, have showed that our societies and our economies are not as resilient as we might have thought. However, by the time you look into the possible solution, the gender one is something that is left on the side and is seldom put under the spotlight as actually the condition enabling everybody to thrive. So also the policies in addition to, and you mentioned very well, Ulrich, also the support. How can I work if I don't have anybody taking care of the kids? Or how can I work if I'm not allowed to enter education, a certain type of education? And how am I going to have the right policies if we have not at gender parity by the time it comes to decision makers, to policy makers, to legislators. So these are all policies that we need to foster. But what we are putting under the spotlight and gathering really hard evidence about for all the countries around the world is the relationship that exists between having a more gender equal ecosystem and the performance of the countries. I think really what policies have to be able to demonstrate, because the evidence is there, has not really been brought to the attention of people, is that by empowering women, we are making a favor to the whole of society. We are not doing it only for ourselves. Of course, we are all selfish. We all want to be better, wealthier, more happy, but it's about improving the level of all the society, because the cascade is into the society, into the family first, into the society as a whole. So these are the kind of policies that we are, let's say, fostering at the global level. So there is the inclusion part that is very, very important, because also in this interconnected world, it's very difficult to continue thinking in isolation. And I think that was a very important message that came out from, we were together at the Digital Ministerial Meeting in India recently, and that is a message that came through. Multilateralism, doing things together in a world that is globalized, is very important.
For sure. And I think it's, as you said, we go from a crisis to a next crisis, but it's all crises that are impacting and that complete all of us and that ignore borders, right? So either we start working together and getting our stuff figured out, or it's not going to work, right? It's our own making of how we structure society. That's not how crises actually work and how we respond to them. Before going towards a conclusion, I have one question on something that I think is a bit scary, which is the jobs for the future. So if we look at the jobs that, of course, are emerging for the future, is jobs where we have even a bigger gender gap, right? We have a lot of problems in getting girls and women in STEM and in them advancing in the STEM sector. I'm lucky, I have a mother and father and brother that are biologists, but I had a model of a woman in STEM in my life, so for me it was never a question if I wanted to, which of course clearly I didn't, to go into STEM. But I think for most people that role modeling is not there, and we lose a lot of potential and capacity of women in STEM, of women working in AI, and being taken seriously when they actually do, because I know from my mom's experience that it was something very hard to be taken seriously as one of the few women in STEM. So I wanted to ask all of you, if you can share, according from your perspective, I think someone is looking more at AI, someone is looking more at tech more generally, but if you could all share, how is it that from your perspective, you're trying to help women succeed, especially when looking at the jobs of the future that are still prevalently occupied and will be occupied by men. So how is it that at the Orange level, at the OECD level, at the UNESCO level, you're trying to tackle this issue? Elisabeth, we can start from you.
Yes, you're right, Gaia. It's quite scary because when coming to STEM and tech, we're talking about how technology will shape the future, and if we cannot involve half of the humanity, it will be a disaster. And the figures are quite appalling. 24% only women only in the tech field. In France, for instance, there's only 7% of teenage girls that are thinking about going into coding, and again, it's really these are really stereotypes, because we at Orange we have a whole range of digital workshops, and when we do a digital workshop for kids, and once again, when there are teams of girls, they have to program robots, etc., or team of boys, the girls are better. Girls at 10, 11, they are better at coding than boys. So how we tackle those challenges is, we have to find alternatives to the traditional pipe, which is schools, engineer schools, where in France, for instance, for 30 years, only 25% of women. So we invested in our own educational and training programs on tech fields. So the importance of acting together, for instance, this program is called Orange Digital Center, and for instance, we launched those programs in every country, so the 25 countries where Orange operates in B2C, and we managed to launch this Orange Digital program thanks to partnership with the German corporation GIZ, for instance. We also partners with other companies like Google, Amazon Web Service to provide free trainings in every country where we operate, in data, in AI, and so basically, and in every country there were KPIs, we told every country from Cameroon to Jordan to Senegal, we said we want a minimum of 30% of girls in every promotion of the Orange Digital Center. And the result is beyond our expectation, because in many countries we have 40% of girls attending our training programs, and after the training programs, 90% of our students, they found a job directly after in tech fields. So that's an alternative to well, to tackle this that issue.
And I think it's a great example of how we need to think outside of the box, right? If we use the mechanisms we have, we're never going to get there fast enough. So being innovative, creating different ways of doing it, I think it's also one of the paths we need to accelerate on for sure. Ulrich, on your side, OECD?
Yeah, just to add to some of the figures Elizabeth mentioned, I mean, certainly, hopefully, one sector where we'll have many future jobs is the green sector, right? And here across the OECD, we have 72% of all green task jobs positions held by men at the moment. And that's a big problem as well if we want women to be involved in the green transition as well. And it goes back to what you both mentioned, the STEM. We have across the OECD, women made up only 30% of new entrants to programs in STEM. And actually then when they exit those programs, even fewer take up a professional job using those programs. So that I think is actually quite a challenge. We have also in this area a few recommendations. We think societies need to, or governments need to take a whole of society approach. We have to incorporate gender equality in schools curricula, for example, but also training teachers to eliminate bias, because that is actually where it starts if we want more girls in STEM. Also implementing gender transformative work training programs. There is a beautiful example from Indonesia called the Wonder Women program, which trained actually Indonesian women to sell clean energy solutions in very remote villages. They then went there, they reached over 250,000 people. So they both enhanced the income of these 250,000 women, but also their decision-making power in the household. So I think that's a positive example. I think also governments need to work with relevant stakeholders to foster a more inclusive environment to attract and retain female talent. You mentioned mentorship programs. That's an important part of this. So is gender-neutral recruitment practices. We need to learn more about that, certainly. We already talked about parental leave. This will also help when it comes to STEM. And then generally, boosting financial support for women-led businesses, I think, is another component. So there are lots of things that we can do to improve in this area.
Thank you very much. And again, I think that speaks to the problem. There's so many solutions, there's so many things we can do and we know we should do. It's just that we're not getting it done fast enough. And that's where, again, the political will, but also the public opinion, of course, can put a lot of pressure on the political will. So we can all play a role, at least in building that pressure, in getting all of these policies, all of these initiatives actually implemented and delivered. Maria Grazia, anything you want to add on your side?
Yeah, we should build this pressure. And it's not, I'm not sure it's about the pace, it's really about the scale and the scope of what needs to be done. Because evidence shows that, as I said, in tech-related jobs, as in any other job, not only there is a need for a different set of skills, so the technical and the social-emotional one, but also we have to make our the people, the workforce, the labor force, change ready, future ready. I mean, these new technologies, what they are doing, if we look at the future, is that they will transform the work of everybody, including our own. What we have seen, for instance, recently with large language models such as ChatGPT, and that I think that's what has scared most of us, is that so far, by the time we thought about automation, we thought it referred to people that, you know, were not well educated, they didn't have a chance. So it was a bit sad because it was damaging already those that were disadvantaged, but it was not touching those that were creative, that had higher education. What ChatGPT and the like have told us is that even creative functions can be automated, which means, of course, not only we have to be able to work with and cope with. Technology and transformative technologies like artificial intelligence, but also that we have to have a continuous upskilling and reskilling in order to be able to keep the pace and be able to thrive. And this is especially true for women that typically self-select out of the treatment. That is, they are not self-confident, and so by the time something is offered, it's always men that jump on it, and they take, a sideline. And this is why, in the context of the implementation of the 2021 recommendation on the ethics of artificial intelligence, not only in the recommendation we have a full chapter, policy chapter on gender. We didn't want it to be mainstream, because too often mainstream means disappearing under the cover. So it had to be singled out. And then we constituted a group which is called Women for Ethical AI, which is a group of women that are skilled in AI, from lawyers to coders to policy experts, that are helping not only to include, upscale, and empower women in the area, but are also helping to address exactly what Ulrich was saying, that is like, for instance, issues related to societal benefit, like climate change. Another thing we are doing, of course, it's also in our name, UNESCO Education, so going back to upskilling, the reskilling, and giving really the entry. Together with that, and this is something that any evidence that exists out there underlines, the big risk of this era is, and you've been working in that, is misinformation and disinformation. And UNESCO has very important programs related to that. I'm sure you're familiar with that. But we also have a special eye on disinformation and misinformation related to gender discrimination that actually links to the next problem we are working at, that is addressing violence against women in the cyberspace. Let's not forget that, unfortunately, violence does not only exist physically, which already is as much as we could take. It also exists, and in some cases, is exacerbated in the virtual, in the digital space. And this is why, for instance, we are working on several lines of safeguarding. And to give you the idea of what we are trying to leverage, really everything that is in our mandate at UNESCO, we're also trying to leverage policies that one wouldn't think are the way to go to ensure gender parity and to have empowered women in the digital era, such as sport. So through sport, we are implementing programs whereby we endow kids, for instance, and especially girls, with skills needed to perform and thrive, like resilience, teamwork, creativity, problem solving, leadership, which is something that all analyses that exist out there say we are missing. And again, this is not about fixing the women problem. It's about taking away those wrong mentalities from us that actually put us in a cage as compared to allowing us to express our full potential. So we go for a panoply of activities that are reinforcing each other in different parts of the world, so to have a complementary effect.
Yeah, no, great, and it's great work, and I think that's also what's important, to really look at the breadth, because it permeates everything, and we need to look at everything. Building on what you're saying about leadership and about also a bit the rules of the game, right? Often all of us, and I think a lot of women that are working in companies, we play by the rules of the game that are already there, which is, I don't know, if you want to be a leader or a boss, let's say, in a more practical way, you should be more competitive, you should advance your self-interest, you should, be very assertive. And I think often what happens, I think, is that we look at mentoring women for women to become more like men. And I think what you were saying, it touches to the point, right? Is for us to express our diversity, not for us to cancel our diversity and play by the existing rules of the game. And that's the last question I have for you, is we have a lot of emphasis in terms of policies, in terms of dealing with stereotypes, in terms of laws, to get women at the decision-making tables. But how is it that once we get to that decision-making table, women and men, so Ulrich, of course, you're part of showing how you should lead differently, how is it that instead of replicating the rules of the game, which clearly are broken and have brought the world and our companies and our countries to where we are, how is it that we can rethink the rules of the game? How is it that we can show a diverse model of leadership and show that, I don't know, empathy, that collaboration, that all these traits are what our world actually needs, and not more self-interest, more profit, more short-sightedness. That is what often we have in our companies, in our countries, and that's often how we see leadership. Ulrike, so you took the mic, so you can start.
To me, it's about understanding, for me, that the two driving pillars of diversity and why we need diversity. One is a fairness approach, right? We want equal opportunities for all. We want equal opportunities for men and women. But it's also, and it goes back to your IQ experiment, it's also about merit. There is merit in diversity, and diverse groups come up with better solutions. And that is exactly why we do not want women in boardrooms to be like men, and we do not want boys in schools to be like girls, right? I mean, we won't get the diversity dividend if we try to impose stereotypes. So we have to do away with stereotypes. That is, to me, the short answer. I remember when I was a very young diplomat in the Danish diplomatic service, there was not a lot of diversity. There was only one female leader to look up to, but she was more tough, more dominant, more demanding, more non-empathetic than all the men, because she had to adopt to male stereotype leadership values. So she was more feared than anyone. That was not really a diversity breakthrough to me as a young man. That came later on. So we have to respect diversity for the sake of diversity and the sake of merit.
Thank you. I think to the point, clear. You want to go next, Elisabeth?
You know, a recent survey amongst French students, the question was, what are for you, the major quality of a leader, of a CEO? And, you know, a few years ago, you could accept authority, ambition, being fierce, being competitive, and now the response was be able to listen, empathy, and benevolence, goodwill. So I don't want to categorize, but those qualities used to be attributed more to women. So that really questioned the fact that the leadership today is not the leadership as yesterday, and it's not a status, it's not a position. It's really, as you said, how you manage to foster creativity thanks to diversity, and this is crucial to tackle the major issues we're facing of social justice, of this climate issue. If you're not resilient, if you don't have agility, if you don't have diverse teams and know how to lead in this diversity, you won't tackle those issues we are addressing in this forum.
I think what is important here is to underline that this is not something against men. It's something to be built with men. And I'm really pleased that you're here in this panel, because sometimes it feels like we are preaching to the choir. We know what our problems are. We know what we would do if we could. But very often, the others are not there to listen. So this is exactly what we are trying to do at UNESCO, and what I think it's necessary here. Have a more inclusive approach. I think we too often forget that the COVID-19 crisis and anything that followed, even if it was really a tragedy under many aspects, it allowed to emerge the ability of women to have a different approach to solving problems, a more collaborative, a more inclusive. So let's leverage that benefits everybody. And this is why we are pursuing two major strands of work. The one is leveraging men as positive allies in the quest for gender parity, demonstrating what is in there for them as well, and how they can benefit from that. Fighting at the same time the toxic masculinities. That is like, it's not only about empowering women, it's also about you not feeling weird just because you feel like crying and you're a boy. There is nothing wrong with that. Or you not being the one that is the bread earner at home and your wife being under the spotlight, under cameras, and be very famous. There is nothing wrong with that. It's all about the way in which we perceive that and in the way in which we can actually transform and have a collective good, which is society and welfare enhancing for everybody. And for sure, the other thing is, let's use words carefully, and let's think what we say. Too often when it comes to communication, we hear, for instance, if a leader is strong, is a man, is a strong leader. if a woman, you were saying, is a leader, is strong, she's assertive.
We're bossy.
We're bossy, we are assertive. Actually, okay, I'm not going to give details, but there were some people. Okay, I'll put all the cards on the table. I passed from going through the European Commission, Studio OECD, to now the UNESCO, right? So I've seen multilateralism including more and more countries every time. And I will never forget that there were a lot of Italians, and I mean, we have seen it here. And since we, perhaps, the ones that come out of the country, because we are not talking about being in the country, that were there, we were all strong-minded. We fought for what we believed. We were really engaged. We were even tagged like the assertive Italian women group. So this is the kind of thing that has to change. You shouldn't tag anybody. And for me, if you ask me what I would like to see is an assessment that completely is unrelated to whether you're a woman or a man or anything, any gender that you like, any color, any ethnicity, any origin. It's really about what you can contribute to society. And this is what we should try and build a societal conscience about this.
And I think that's what you say, it's a really good point. Finally, we're all humans, that's the bottom line. And we should also look at classifying people by people who care, people who don't care, not only about the markers, let's say, that we're all using, because finally that's what really counts and what can make a difference. So we're super out of time, so 10 seconds to each. If you have a magical wand and you can change anything, one thing for women across the world, what would that one thing be? You start, you have the mic, Maria Grazia.
Well, I will start with having women have support for their family. I think all the rest will change.
Thanks. Ulrich?
No, I mean, we have to do away with social discrimination, whether that's in soft norms or in hard law. I think that's the major impediment to everything we've talked about today, be that pipeline, future jobs, or equal sharing of responsibility also in decision making.
Thanks. Elizabeth?
I would remove all barriers to unlock full potential for the women, because, as you said, Maria Grazia, empowering women means empowering the whole society.
So just as a key conclusion word, I think it's about also self-image, how we perceive ourselves as women, as men, and freeing ourselves from the stereotypes, being really who we are, bringing the diversity and claiming the space, because we each deserve space and we all can bring a different way of working. And I think that's something that I would like all of us to take away and take it home as a key takeaway, is that we can be leaders, as Elizabeth was saying, at all levels. It's not what's written on our office door, it's not the job title, it's not being a CEO, it's about how we go about bringing change in the world, positive change, hopefully not negative change. And that means that any one of us can bring that change. And I really hope that each of us will be empowered, inspired by this panel, by this discussion, to be the change really you want to see. If you're a woman, even more if you're a man. We always have Ulrich as our men quota in these panels, so we want more men coming as our men quota in these panels. And Ulrich, of course, you also be welcome, but it would be great to have more men playing that role. So really, thank you for listening, and I'll stay on stage for the next panel, but a big applause for our speakers. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Gaia.
Anche per me.
Do better next time.
All the trip for this panel, really. See you soon. Piacere, ci vediamo. Si scrive, vediamo in contatto direttamente, ci prendiamo un caffè la prossima volta. Veramente, lo so, però pian piano ci arriviamo. Vuoi una foto? Sì. Perfetto. Grazie, grazie. Mi piace la tua vivacità.
Quanti report mi sei fatta? Quello del Digital Gender Divide. Io ero all'Ocse prima, quindi sono
Ho visto, poi ho guardato un po'.
Poi adesso
Di tutto di più.
però gender sempre, perché sinceramente questo mi sono sentita
let me do an announcement. We have a panel straight away. So Juliette, Amine, if you can come on stage. And we're having a very quick panel before lunch. It's about youth being actors of change. So please stay, because we want youth to be heard.
Nice just to tell you, thank you for the talk. I just started my career, and it's very liberating. And sometimes I don't feel legitimate to do my job, but having heard all this talk,
Don't doubt yourself.
really nice. Thank you.
I'm happy.
Juliette, enchantée.
Hello, enchantée Gaïa. Je pense qu'il y a beaucoup de gens là qui bougent. Désolée, on est un peu en retard, mais on y va.
Ok.
Ça vous va? Ça, c'est...
Ok.
Ça marche. I'll say that to the comms team, no worries. Thank you for everything. Bye. Ok, alors on commence et je vais switcher des langues et du coup.
Let's start, and I'm going to switch languages. So maybe I'm going to be a bit lost sometimes. I'm sorry about that. I am here with Amine Messal from the Open Diplomacy Institute, who was also the leader of the Youth 7 group at the G7 in Japan this year. And I'm with Juliette Keff, who is a president of Vert Green in French. You're going to tell us more about your work and project. So, if we look at the world today, what do you think we need to work on, and how are you doing it? And let me grab another mic. So we can speak in French. And if you need to listen to translation, you can grab a headset, but let's continue in French. What is important to me in the world today? First, I would say saving what we can, what can be saved in terms of living beings and in terms of justice, because we're faced with a difficult situation socially and environmentally. So I'm trying to do what I can. I don't think there is a silver bullet, so I'm trying to improve various aspects at the same time. At the moment, I'm studying research, economic research, and the link between the economy and the environment, because the link isn't always clear. We're not always sure about what we can do, because there are politicians who support projects that make sense, usually on the left, the Green Party, sometimes on the right, but not as much. When it comes to diplomacy, I agreed to attend the youth summit before the G7 so that we could make proposals to leaders, and I also did an internship at the UN in the climate change division. It's always very frustrating to work at the international level, but we have to, unfortunately. So academically, diplomatically, and also we can also be activists. I believe that we will reach that if we want to reach a certain level, if we want to make progress, we need citizens to act. Great. And what is interesting in what you were saying is that if we compare your generation with the previous generation, it's very different. Things have changed because people used to have one job and do the same job for their entire lives. And I think our generation is different now. Now we can think about the change that we want to see, and we believe that we can be the change, bring change in various ways. So it's really cool, it's really good. It's a great way to bring change in a more effective way without limiting ourselves to one aspect. Juliette, from your perspective, what is important, and how do you try to contribute? Good morning, and thank you for your invitation. I'm delighted to be here. First, I believe that our world is contaminated with fossil fuels, and that's a key problem. 80% of climate change is due to fossil fuels. Last year, we had a panel discussion at the MEDEF, so the French Employer Federation, with Patrick Pouyanné, so CEO of Total Energy, with our Minister for the Environment as well. And so we have a minister who is happy about what she's doing with the government, even though we know that the government isn't doing enough. And then we have Patrick Pouyanné, so CEO of Total Energy, who only provided us with the proof that Total isn't doing anything for the environment. So greenwashing from companies and politicians who don't do anything. So I am a journalist. I created a media outlet there, the media outlet that clearly states its intentions. And what I want to do is to make the situation clear. Secondly, we have many problems, true, but we also want to be positive. So we want to shed light on organizations that are going in the right direction. So, for example, people attending this forum who provide solutions, a response to the multiple crises that we are faced with. Because often people try to make us think that there's no solution, but it's not true. Scientists have been documenting the solutions for 50 years now. We know the solutions, and we need more journalists to shed light on these solutions. And finally, I wanted to say that form matters. I created an independent media outlet funded by people who use it. So it's a solidarity based, it's a social economy project. And media outlets are funded through advertising currently, which is a problem because it leads to contradiction. So at the same time, you're going to provide information on the climate crisis. On the other hand, you're also going to have an ad about the new SUV, for example. So it's very important to share information and to also respect that in what you do. Thank you very much. It's true that we lack transparency, and it's very difficult to understand the world we live in. What is at stake? What is doing what? And I found that transparency is very useful. It's helpful to better understand the situation, because information is key for us to decide what we're going to do, how we're going to commit. Information is the first component of action. And I wanted to add action, actually, talk about action. We were talking about gender equality before. We know what we have to do. We have the solutions, the policies. We know how to design laws. The problem is that we don't turn it into a reality. And I think that information and action, or rather information and having a multi-dimensional approach, I think that's what we're missing, and what young people are really starting to focus on to create a new dynamic, to start from action. I mean, I turn to you now. You recently led the Youth 7 French delegation during the G7. I worked with the G20, with the Italian presidency, so I know the Youth 20 and Youth 7 groups. And my first question is the position that you had at the decision-making table. Was it a real decision-making seat, or were they doing that? Were you attending just to tick a box? because we want young people to be involved, but is it an honest initiative or not? Or are we just trying to tick a box? What is your feedback on that? And how should the situation change? What should we do in order to make it true? I have several answers to this. First, a very pessimistic answer. During this type of summits, as young people, we can't wait anything from it. When we make proposals to leaders, I know that leaders are not going to listen. I don't even know if they're going to read them, honestly. I agreed to go. I wasn't sure because I had to take a plane to talk about climate issues, so I wasn't sure I wanted to go. But I thought, well, if I don't go, someone else is going to go, someone who will be less committed. So I went not because I hoped that leaders would find my proposals amazing and that they were going to change immediately. I think we're going to celebrate the IPCC's 40th anniversary soon, so it's been a long time. I think scientists have been very depressed for many years. So if people like scientists do not manage to make politicians listen, I don't think I would be able to do it. So I decided to go because I wanted to meet other young people who were interested in the same issues and who also felt powerless, because we are faced with networks, with oil lobbies, for example, the agricultural sector as well. So I wanted to network and meet other young people. And I wanted to have a different vision. I wanted to understand what diplomatic obstacles were, because there is lobbying, which is an obstacle, but there are other obstacles that are hidden, not as obvious. Cultural tensions, for example, with the global north and the global south struggling to agree. So not only economic issues. For example, during the summit, it was difficult for me to agree with the Japanese delegation because they had a different perspective, because Japan is probably the most developed country in its region. And so the Japanese delegation didn't understand why we were so cautious with mining and in the sea bottom. Because we know the risks, but the Japanese delegation didn't have the same perspective. But it's not because they're not environmentally friendly. It's not because they don't care about the planet. It's because they have a different cultural perspective. They believe that first you should lift everyone out of poverty. And if you don't document the problem, they're not convinced. If we haven't identified a major problem clearly, we should be careful and we shouldn't take the risk to stop mining, for example. So it was really interesting for me to go for these reasons, to see what the obstacles might be, obstacles that I didn't know. But I, of course, didn't want to influence politicians' decisions. And I also wanted to better understand the institutions, because after we came back to France, we tried to use our proposals and to make them national proposals, to submit them to the French government. So it's interesting because it creates different channels in France. And recently, I got in touch with the president of the Occitanie region in the south of France, and I introduced myself, and I told her that I wanted to talk about a new project for a motorway, and that we really needed to talk about it, and she agreed to meet me. So for me, it's not an issue to talk to people, because I want people to understand that if they don't do anything, at some point, there's going to be no more tap water in their city. And then people are going to understand that it's not in the best interests. So I have no problems with that. I can go and talk to everyone if needed. So anytime I have a chance to talk to someone, I'm going to take it. I'm not really sure about what can change, how much change we can achieve during this type of international summit, the G7, the G20. I would like leaders to understand, I would like them to understand that they're part of the problem. Because usually in international meetings, I hear that we are going to try to help the Global South to develop, and that really bothers me. Because first you should think about your own problems, your own misbehaviors. And then, when you deal with your own issues, then you can start addressing others' issues. And, well, maybe we should just listen to scientists. We've been waiting for 50 years. Thank you for your answer. You touched upon many different questions. Zero poverty, zero carbon, zero exclusion. So intersections between different aspects. For example, you mentioned the Japanese delegation saying that lifting people out of poverty was the priority. And also that we're asking countries which have nothing to do with the climate crisis, we ask them to help. But it doesn't mean that we have no solutions. We should try to turn these solutions into win-win situations. Other development models, other types of societies. But you're right, we should work on the solution at home first, because we are the source of the problem. So we should change the system at home first. That's key, that's very important, and we need to put pressure. Just to come back to this discussion I had with the delegation, Japanese delegation, we had lunch together several times out of the negotiating table. Usually it's when you're eating that you can negotiate best. I spoke with one of the delegation members, and I wanted to understand her point of view. Because, in my opinion, the climate crisis affects the people who are poor. And we know that destroying the seafloor is a major problem. So I told her that we had the evidence, and I showed her a video of MIT. And after talking with her, she understood, and the next day, she didn't give her veto because she understood the reasons. And I think that something that was also a trigger for her was that I told her I wasn't trying to stand for my own country, and that I felt closer to her because we were part of the same generation rather than closer to French leaders. Our communique was quite ambitious. And coming back to what Juliette said, debunking the major companies' public discussions. Sometimes decisions are made. Well, it's the past now, so we should realize now that these decisions no longer work. But we can always change our minds. It's always possible. That's fantastic. I think it would be fantastic if people could think this way. There is too much polarity. We should realize that we can move forward together. And it's not about politics. So well done. it's great that you managed to solve these issues. Juliette, so you are president of VER, media outlet, so that everybody can understand what it is at stake with the climate crisis, to find solutions and to make the right decisions as well in your everyday life. Because we have an impact on the planet with what we do. You created a media outlet, so I believe that it's because you weren't satisfied with the existing media outlets in France, but also elsewhere. So you decided to take matters into your own hands. And so you had a really proactive approach. And I wanted to better understand what were the failings, the shortcomings in the way the media talk about the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis, and also how your generation can help us rethink the media's role in our societies, how this service of information can help us change the situation.
Thank you very much for this question. I'd say that traditional media outlets are facing major challenges because we do have different specialized outlets. Yet, one of the major issues that I faced is the fact that everything is categorized in terms of dissemination of information. Once you open a newspaper, you've got different categories with the politics papers, and somehow you've got the environmental part where you will find papers published on the extraction of the resources. But these topics are analyzed as such, meaning that there is no transversality in the analysis of what is happening in the world. Environment should be part of all the sections when you're reading and opening a newspaper. Look at what happened during the presidential campaign in 2022, when the word climate was very poorly represented amongst the journalists. The problem is that even the journalists have little knowledge about this issue. So we are also working on that. And we also need the media outlets to tackle the roots of the problem, which is actually our way of life. So we need to explain to the people that the heat waves that is happening now in September is linked to our way of life, our energy consumption. And that is also linked to the fact that our Prime Minister, Elisabeth Borne, is taking a private jet to travel within the country. I also would like to mention something else, is the way that we are talking about the environment, the way that we are talking about biodiversity. And here I'm mentioning the fact that we are talking about moral values, when we are talking about punitive ecology, about eco-gestures, which seems to be something very pessimistic and something very difficult to put in place. And I believe that there is also a responsibility in the way that we address these issues, because you can also have humor when talking about eco-gestures. And it is also very important to document the solutions that can be put in place by the citizens. Because I've already talked about these issues to different media outlets, and they are telling me that there is no public, there is no audience. So I believe that there is a new way of showing things. So I've developed an Instagram account where I've developed different videos, and photographs that are inspired by the Instagram environment. In France, there are 37% of people who are denying the climate change. So what does it tell us? It tells us that these people are in pure denial, or that they do not see the relationship between the impact of human and the disruption of climate. So the reality on the ground is that 40% of the youth today does not realize the relationship between climate disruption and the impact of human on the planet. So we still need to give a voice to these subjects, not only on TV, but also on social networks, because campaigning of disinformation is of high importance on a social network, where you've got most of the youth attending. So this is the work that we really want to perform, and because I believe that it's really important. I also have a few words that I have seen about the eco-gestures that can be performed. And it is true that even if I'm quite involved in these issues, I learned new things by reading the fact that journalists are not expliciting really the relationship between the impact of human and climate change. And I believe that this is something of the highest importance for awareness. And it is also at the root of the denial that I have just mentioned, because then you have got people who believe that technology is going to be our savior. So it is our own work to make sure that we tackle this information. Thank you very much, both of you, for the amount of work that you are performing. And we are also super late. But I've got a question for you. What is the thing that you would change if you were able to provide change? Let's see, for example, if you were able to meet Elisabeth Tanguy, or the direction of the OCDE, what is it that you would like to do? What kind of impact would you like to see in the short term?
C'est une question assez difficile parce que quand on est journaliste,
it's a difficult question because when you are a journalist, you are trying not to take sides.
L'enjeu qui me tient à cœur énormément, c'est de garantir l'indépendance des médias.
But what is at stake for me is the independence of the media. So if I were owning media outlets, I would make sure that all the journalists would be independent. Today there is a problem of monopoly of media that are owned by few people. And this is threatening the independence of journalists. And something happened with the outlet Journal du Dimanche when Bolloré bought Lagardère, and that has impacted the way of the journalists could write their papers, because now you have got at the head of the journalist someone from Valeurs Actuelles, of the far-right media outlet in France. So for me, independence of the media is very important.
Mais en tout cas, c'est un enjeu extrêmement important dont on ne parle pas suffisamment.
And I believe that this is something that needs to be explained more and more so that the public know more about what they are reading. I would like to emphasize the fact that the media are the fourth power in our republic. So there are associations that are trying to make sure that environmental issues are more present in the media. And I believe that the independence of journalists is also linked to the fact that we need to strengthen our democracies for the common good. and for the society.
Et je viens d'Italie. En Italie, on a
And I am coming from Italia, where we are also facing this issue.
c'est quoi que tu ferais? Toi, tu pourrais être le undersecretary
What
general.
would be your decision if you were Under Secretary General,
Tu serais le président du G7.
or if you were president of the G7?
Je sais pas. J'hésite, je sais pas, il y a plusieurs choses, je pense, importantes à faire. Le problème, c'est que,
I'm hesitating between different options
comme disait récemment François Ruffin,
because François Ruffin
qui implique
said that we are facing a system
du vice et qui punit
that implies that the people who are making bad decisions are awarded.
Je crois que Bernard Arnault, ces entreprises, elles ont plus de 300 filiales.
I think that Bernard Arnault owns more than 300 subsidies, and he also practices fiscal evasion. So I believe that if this money were to be captured, it could be allocated for the energy transition. So if I were having one of these positions, I believe I would make sure that these big companies would not perform fiscal evasion, and then I would capture this money, let's say $1 billion, and I would reallocate this money. Because I don't know really what you can do with such profits.
Des sympathiques aussi. Et puis évidemment, tout ce qui est au-dessus, on le prend et on fait des choses utiles avec et importantes pour.
And all of the money that you would be able to capture, you would then fund projects related to energy transitions.
En fait, citoyens, dans les conseils actionnariaux, avec
I think I would also try to make sure that the youth had a greater voice in boarding rooms,
de propriété privée, à l'heure où on se rend compte que les
because I do not understand how we are still in our world with a private property system when the common good is at stake. Is it because I have got a garden and that there is oil that I am able to use this oil and then to threaten the climate and the nature and the biodiversity? So I think there is something to do about it, because the private property is at stake here.
avec revenir en arrière et puis avec des conseils citoyens qui pourraient avoir une décision, avoir
And I believe that
démocratique.
citizens, if they were to have a greater voice in boarding rooms, then they would be listened more carefully in terms of the strategies to be adopted by the big company. Look at what is happening with the big oil companies such as Total Energy.
Donc moi je fais ça et ça me paraît quand même assez raisonnable.
So these are the options that I'd put into place,
Et un mot à dire sur la direction
because I believe that
de la vie d'eux.
in democracy, citizens should have their say in the strategies of the biggest companies, since their projects are affecting the lives of others.
Quelque chose qui pourrait se faire que s'il y a une coalition internationale.
And I believe that could be the case only if there was an international coalition, because otherwise companies keep having subsidies elsewhere to protect their money. And in terms of the super profits, we have witnessed a raise in the energy prices because of the Ukraine war.
Super profit, l'Espagne l'a fait, l'Italie l'a fait.
And Spain, Italy, UK have applied these taxes on profits. And Netherlands is also following the path, but not France. Because sometimes when you are facing such difficulties, there is no other solutions but nationalizations. Look at what happened in the Second World War with Roosevelt.
Donc là, on est dans une situation de guerre et d'urgence.
So I believe that we are facing an emergency right now, and I believe that we have to resort to these options.
Enclencher la transition énergétique. Le monde est en train de s'effondrer.
Today we are witnessing the collapse of our world. The superficie of France has burned due to wildfires in Canada. More than 60,000 people died due to heat waves. But we are still having many projects for oil activities and extractions of minerals. So I believe that ambition measures still need to be taken. So if I were to be at the head of the OECD, that's what I'd do. Well, let's see what would happen if you were to have these positions looking forward to seeing that, because I know that change has to come from within. And we need to be brave so that we can defend our common good. And we need to be brave also to take these decisions. Congratulations on your work. And thank you very much. And I'm wishing you a successful forum. Thank you for being with us.